Hi everybody, welcome to Do You Believe on Paranormal Zone TV. I want to thank you all so much for joining us tonight. You're going to love the show. And for those who may be new to the show, if you would please subscribe, I'd appreciate it. And please don't forget to give the show a like. Now, I have a friend of mine. I've known him for a couple of years now. I did interview Mark before. And he's back with another new book. And he's also written 3 of them in this series. And this is Dr. Mark G. Hewitt. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Noreen. Thank you for having me.
Mark, would you please tell the viewers a little bit about yourself before we start the show?
Absolutely. I'm a true crime author. I have written a book on Charles Manson, and I've just recently published a book on the Zodiac serial killer, the first book in a trilogy that I'm writing. The first book just came out last week, and number 2 will be next September, and then the third one will be the September following that.
What would the other titles be for the other 2 books?
Oh boy, my publisher keeps changing the title.
Oh.
The title of the first book is Hunted, and it's about the 7th title that we were playing with before we settled on a title. But I think the second book will have to do something with the probably profiled, because we're going to be talking about a profile of the Zodiac serial killer. And then the third book will be Revealed, because we're going to narrow down the list of suspects.
Awesome. Well, you'll come back, I hope, for the other 2 books.
Oh, I hope so, if I get an invitation.
Of course you will. I love this topic, and I know there are a lot of viewers and a lot of people that are interested in the Zodiac. It is an unsolved case dating back to what, 1969, 1967? When Mark?
Well, there's some dispute. The Zodiac, the 5 canonical murders happened in 1968 and 1969. But following that, the Zodiac was tied to an additional murder back in 1966, so it may go back that far.
Okay.
When he was tied to that murder, he also said there are a hell of a lot more down there being Southern California, so he may be connected to murders even before that.
Oh. All right, so let's start the show with, I want to know why you are so interested in the Zodiac.
Oh my goodness, I'm not just interested in it, I'm passionate about it, and some of my friends say it's my addiction. I first became aware of the Zodiac case back in the 1980s. I had just finished doing an internship in the Bay Area for about a year, and I was back living in Michigan, and I heard about the Zodiac, and I was really upset because I had just been in the Bay Area for a year, and I knew of all the places, and nobody had ever mentioned the case to me while I was out there. So I read about it with great interest. Kind of left it on the back burner, thinking, boy, I wish I had more time. It would be interesting to delve into that case, but I never did at the time. About 10 years ago, I started to get passionately interested in it. I decided to devote some more time to the case and began reading everything I could. Now, back then, there were only a handful of books on the case, and not very many people had actually done much analysis on the different crimes and on the killer himself. There were a couple of websites, but they were just in their infancy. And so it didn't take me very long to read everything that had been written on the case back then. And after doing that, I began thinking about it and making some connections. And I began to notice some things that nobody was writing about, nobody was discussing. So I launched my journal back in 2009. That's Radians and Inches, and we're in our 7th year, I believe it is now.
Oh yeah, let me show that. Let me show that.
Last week.
Okay, I'm showing that to him. This is the periodical I get from Mark, Radians and Inches, and if you are a Zodiac follower, it's the website, radiansandinches.com?
That's correct. Radians, R-A-D-I-A-N-S, and inches.com.
Yeah. Oh, this is fabulous. Comes out 4 times a year.
4 times a year, and I and my 2 assistant editors put together half a dozen articles each issue that delves into the different areas, the different crime scenes, the different attacks, pretty much anything is fair game if it moves the case forward. One of my assistant editors is passionate about graphology, so he's been writing a series on the handwriting of the Zodiac. But really anything, we discuss the letters, we discuss the different crimes. A couple of years ago, I put together a profile of what I thought might describe the Zodiac to try to find who he was, and we have a lot of fun with it.
And that's in your book, the profile? Because I was wondering if there was a criminal profile done on the Zodiac.
Some profiling has been done. The FBI took a look at it back in the 1970s, but they didn't progress very far into their work, and that's back when profiling was in its infancy. My second book, which will be out next September, I hope to include a rather extensive profile based on all of the evidence that has been gathered in the case.
Now, you would think that somebody would want to do a full profile on the Zodiac since it was an unsolved case.
Well, yeah, it has been done. By the time criminal profiling was advanced within the FBI and people were accepting it more, which really didn't happen until the 1990s and the release of the movie Silence of the Lambs, people began to get excited and interested in profiling. But by that time, the Zodiac had been out of the news for almost 20 years. So people weren't really excited about that case as much anymore, and so profiling was done in the more current cases. Mm-hmm. But some work has been done. I know a professor who has challenged his class, his psychology class, to put together a profile of the Zodiac as part of their classwork. And I'm sure some interesting things came of that. Mm-hmm. And I think everybody who looks in the case kind of puts together a profile of their own, who this person is, what he's like, what to look for in a particular suspect. So there's a lot of work that's been done. I don't know how extensive it has been done. And the FBI has never released its notes on any profiling that's been done on the Zodiac.
Why do you think that is, Mark?
Well, John Douglas, in his book, The Murders, the Cases That Haunt Us, wrote about the Zodiac, and he said that back in the 70s, the case was put on his desk. And so he began to work on it, and then suddenly it was taken away from him. He didn't know why he was given the case, and he didn't know why the case was taken away from him. But that's what he has to say about the case. He does a little bit of profiling work in that book, and gives a thumbnail sketch of a profile.
So that would lead us into who is the Zodiac killer. Can you give us a little bit of what you came up with as a profile on the Zodiac?
Well, that's the question. Who is the Zodiac? And I found it to be the case is so complex. To me, it's the greatest American criminal mystery. There are a lot of mysteries in American crime. You have John Benet Ramsey of the Black Dahlia, many others, but I think the Zodiac is the greatest American criminal mystery because he killed so many. He killed many people. He claims many more than the canonical 5. He claimed as many as 37 murders, and he left all kinds of evidence. You're asking me earlier about why I'm passionate about it. Uh-huh. One of the big questions in the case is, why was he never caught?
Yeah.
He sent nearly 20 letters to law enforcement agencies and newspapers. He killed people at various sites, and the police were able to collect fingerprints and boot prints and car tire prints. So much evidence seems to have been collected, and yet nobody knows who he is. That's part of the reason I'm really fascinated about it. But because it's such a complex case, really, who is the Zodiac? I'm not going to be tackling that question until the 3rd book of my series. Okay. At this point, I'm focusing on the murders, the crime scenes themselves, the letters that were sent, the codes that were sent in the letters, and the police investigation into the Zodiac, what they did, how they followed up, what they did in the various crime scenes. That's the topic of the 1st book.
Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
Who is the Zodiac? the whole mystery of it.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing that he was never caught. Absolutely amazing. And well, we'll talk about the code letters later, because I'm really interested in that. So, okay, tell the viewers how the Zodiac got his name.
The Zodiac gave himself the name. After a couple of murders were committed, he became called in the press the Cipher Slayer or the Code Killer. Those were two names that were given to him. The law enforcement taunted him after one of his letters and said, well, we're not really sure that this letter is from the killer. Zodiac, in August of 1969, sent a letter that began with the infamous words, "This is the Zodiac speaking." Almost every letter from that point forward began with that phrase, "This is the Zodiac speaking." So from that, he was given the name the Zodiac. Questions arise as to why did he call himself the Zodiac? What does that mean? Was that name derived from a watch with the word Zodiac on it? Was he interested in planetary movements? Was he into astrology? Yeah, a lot of questions have been raised but never answered. It was just this repeated phrase over and over again, "This is the Zodiac speaking," which became a very terrifying phrase. Some people think that he used the phrase once in a letter as the title, and it so caught on and so terrified people that he began to use it again and again because it was so effective. And he refers to himself as the Zodiac in future letters, but almost never where the word comes from is that phrase.
Oh, see, I always thought the newspapers named him the Zodiac.
Not at all.
Wow, I didn't know that. Okay, so then you had mentioned dates a little bit ago about the killing spree. As far as we know, what did it started in 69 or 68? But you're talking
December 68. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay, honey. No, go ahead.
December 2068. The first canonical murders took place outside of Vallejo on Lake Herman Road in Solano County, California.
Okay, but there wasn't. What about Mary Jo Bates?
Cherry Jo Bates was murdered in October of '66, the night before Halloween night.
Right. So is it?
That is it's considered by most people to be a possible Zodiac murder because he didn't fess up to that one until after his previous crime spree was over, and he always, in his letters and in his writing on Brian Hartnell's car door, he started his counting at December '68. So that's why that one's considered the first canonical murder. But later on, a tie was made between the Zodiac murders and this murder back in 1966. And once that was publicized, then the Zodiac sent a letter where he claimed credit for that murder.
Oh, he did. Okay.
Some people say he just claimed a murder that he didn't actually commit, but there's quite a bit of evidence that he was involved in it because there are follow-up letters. The letters that he wrote following the murder of Cherry Jo Bates had grammar, vocabulary items very similar to Zodiac later letters. So it's quite obvious to me that the Zodiac wrote those letters following that murder. But can we prove that the Zodiac actually committed that murder? That's we don't have any forensics that links that murder to the other murders.
Then what was his choice of weapon for his victims?
For Cherry Jo Bates, he used a very small knife, almost like a small kitchen knife. And because it was such a small blade, and Cherry put up a real fight against him, it was a real struggle. It wasn't an easy murder. Some have theorized that that proves that it was a first murder or it was an early murder, because he murdered later on with a much larger knife, not attempting with a smaller knife. It is also possible that he wasn't planning on killing her. Maybe he was threatening to assault her sexually, or just threaten her or scare her, and pulled out this little tiny knife. But he did end up killing her, and maybe it was an accidental murder that gave him a taste of blood and gave him a taste of enjoyment of committing murder. We don't exactly know.
But that wasn't his M.O. I don't think he didn't sexually assault any of the other female victims, did he?
He did not, no.
Oh, okay. What was his M.O.?
An M.O. is merely the way he carries out things, the way he does what he does. And serial killers can change their M.O. quite easily. And one of the fascinating parts of the Zodiac case is the amount and significance of change with respect to the Zodiac's M.O. He changed regularly, and he changed quite significantly in what he did, because he killed with a knife, he killed with a 9mm weapon, he killed with a 22mm weapon.
So he changed it.
The first murder was with a tiny blade. A later murder was with a foot-long bayonet-style knife. He murdered after dark. He murdered before dark.
God.
He murdered couples, but he also attacked a single female, and he attacked a single male.
You know, that's what the police used. They used the serial killer's M.O. to link all the murders. But he changed his M.O. so many times. Wouldn't it have been hard to link him to other murders?
It would be. M.O. is something that can be changed, and most serial killers do change their M.O. at least slightly, because they learn, they get better at what they're doing. They try to do different things to bring about more enjoyment of what they're doing, and they also try to do different things to confuse the police and to get away with what they're doing. What doesn't change is the signature. So M.O. can change from murder to murder, and often does, even if slightly. But a killer's signature does not change. That's because the reason the serial killer kills is for the signature. So what police attempt to do is identify what the signature is, and that can give them an idea of who is doing which murder.
As well as his pattern. Now, he seemed to kill, his victims seemed to be all young adults, except for one. The only one I know of is Paul Stein, the cab driver. But weren't most of his victims young adults?
Well, even Paul Stein was in his late 20s.
No way. He looked like he was 50 years old.
Well, he must be a very mature...
No.
In his late 20s.
Mark, come on. He couldn't have been that young. Maybe they're posting the wrong picture. He looks like an old... He looks like he's a... Here, I'll show the picture of him.
Okay.
Oh my...
I can't
There's
see the
no
picture,
way.
Of course, but...
Oh my God, he was in his 20s? Wow. Well, we'll talk about that murder. Hey, you know what? Do you want to go... okay, so they were... So then, actually, they were all young adults then, right?
Well, they were, yes. Yeah, they were young adults. A couple of them were still teenagers.
Yeah, I wonder why he picked that age group. Why do you think?
That's an excellent question.
You know,
one of the questions that police always deal with is victimology. Why did the killer select the victims that he did? What about those victims attracted him? It could be a lot of three of the attacks were performed on couples who were in lovers' lane areas or remote areas. It could be that he attacked there because it was outside of the city, outside of away from witnesses. Others have theorized that he attacked couples because he wasn't in a relationship himself and he resented people who were.
Really? Do you think that the Zodiac was a younger adult?
He was identified identified by those who witnessed him as being around 30 years of age, so he was likely slightly older than all of his victims. He referred to several of the victims as kids in his letters. So I gave an idea that he looked down on them. He considered them younger than him. So the age that's been given for him was around 30.
Mm.
But there were other estimates as high as 45, so or as young as 25.
Interesting. Do you want to let's go into the now there are 5 victims or 5 murders that he is absolutely been identified as being the killer, correct?
Yes, those
Okay.
are considered the canonical 5, but you will find researchers who doubt one or the other of them, saying, well, no, maybe he didn't do this one or maybe he didn't do that one. But he gave a pretty good indication that he was involved in all 5 of those by providing the police with information on what he had done, details known only to him and the police. In one instance at Lake Berryessa, he wrote on the car door after attacking the couple. And that way they can link the handwriting on the car door writing to that attack. Following the murder of Paul Stein, he deposited a piece of Stein's bloody shirt in actually 2 of his follow-up letters, so that you get an absolute idea that the Zodiac's handwriting and the Zodiac attack occurred together.
Okay, so let's go in chronological order of the murders. Okay, so the first one was go ahead. You want to tell them?
December 20, 1968. We talked about that briefly. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen were parked in a lonely area outside of Vallejo, California. Neither of them survived the gunshot attack on them, so that they were not able to say what they had seen. It is unknown exactly what happened, but what happened took place during a 6-minute window of opportunity. In other words, different people saw the couple at the crime scene 6 minutes apart, and during that 6 minutes, the Zodiac apparently showed up, parked, got out of his car, and shot the couple, got back in his car, and took off. Whatever else happened, or if there are any words exchanged, we don't know. The killer knew himself, because those 2 did not survive to be able to give any testimony.
And who discovered the bodies? The people that had seen the Zodiac?
A young mother who went to pick up her son was driving along Lake Herman Road, and she came up and saw that scene. She said that it looked like she saw a station wagon that looked like 2 people had fallen out of it. It was pretty obvious that it was a serious crime. So instead of stopping, she accelerated the car, driving to speeds of 60 or 70 miles an hour, went into the next town of Benicia and looked for a police officer to alert the police to what had happened.
All right. And then the second one?
The second one was 7.5 months later. It was only about 2 miles away as the crow flies from that attack scene. It was 4th of July. Also, the outskirts of Vallejo. A couple is a more convoluted story here, because Darlene Farron, the woman who was attacked, she was married, but she was meeting with the guy who was not her husband. They were going out to a park, and they had parked, and within a few minutes of being there, somebody came up, drove up behind, parked behind them, got out of his vehicle, didn't say a word, walked up to the passenger side of the vehicle and opened fire on the 2. He walked back to his car, and Mike Majot, who was the male who was with Darlene, he cried out. Either he cried out in pain or something, but he alerted the Zodiac, who turned around and walked back to the passenger window and shot the victim 2 more times.
Oh my God.
Darlene Farron died. She was DOA at the hospital. Mike Majot miraculously survived despite being shot 4 times.
Oh my God.
Unbelievable that it was miraculous that he did survive. He was not a very good witness. He could describe what he saw, but he went into a lifetime of drugs and alcohol, and he was interviewed, even 7, 8 years ago, and the things that he says now just don't make a lot of sense.
Why do you think that is? Why don't they make a lot of sense?
Why do I think he doesn't make a lot of sense?
Yeah.
Well, maybe the event affected him a whole lot, and that's what led to his problems with substance abuse. But I don't think he has memories anymore of what has taken place. And so many people have talked to him about the case and tried to talk them into their theory that he doesn't know what he's saying.
Oh, really?
He says he was lying outside the car for 9 hours waiting for the police to come. Well, it didn't exactly happen that way.
Who discovered the bodies?
A couple of young people were driving in the area looking for a friend. They pulled in the parking lot and they saw this car. They thought maybe their friend was in that car, so they were thinking about approaching the car to see if that's where the friend was. And suddenly the lights went on in the car, and they noticed that there was a guy lying perpendicular to the car on the parking lot. And so they rushed up to the car, said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Hurry, get a doc, I've been shot." So the three teenagers jumped back in the car, went to one of their homes, called the police, and alerted them to the fact of the attack.
And at this time, the Zodiac wasn't using any coverings on his face because he obviously didn't think anybody would survive.
Probably not. And so Mike Majot, who was able to be interviewed following the attack, said that he wasn't wearing anything, said that he didn't have glasses, described him as having short curly hair, curly almost blonde hair, described him as being stout, somewhat overweight, maybe about, I don't have the specific description in front of me at the moment, but said he was wearing a shirt, a blue shirt, but couldn't tell the officers if it was a light blue or a dark blue shirt. Described the car as brown color, similar in shape and size to Darlene Farron's car that she was driving for the evening.
Interesting. Okay, let's go to the next murders.
Okay, and it was following that murder about a month later that the Zodiac sent his 408 cipher.
Oh, really?
The very first cipher that he sent.
Oh, gosh.
And in that letter he said, I'm the one who attacked those kids, and I also attacked those kids the previous Christmas. Here's some information that only I and the police know. And he listed some facts from December 20. He listed a bunch of other facts from July the 4th, and then proceeded to place 1/3 of a piece of cipher in each of these letters. He sent a total of 3 of these letters to 3 different Bay Area newspapers. One to the San Francisco Chronicle, one to the San Francisco Examiner, and one to the Vallejo Times-Herald. So these 3 newspapers had to work together if they were going to solve this cipher. The ciphers were just, they're each about the size of 1/3 of the sheet of paper, and each had a bunch of symbols on them. And the idea was each symbol stands for a letter. Can you figure out what symbols represent what letters? And if you do that, you'll find the message. Well, the Zodiac didn't explain which sheet was first and which sheet was second. He didn't explain that there would be 1 letter per symbol, or 1 symbol per letter, exactly how it would work. So the police were not able to break it. They sent it off to different agencies to take a look at it, but the police were not able to break the cipher. However, the newspapers published it in the paper as the Zodiac requested, and citizens took a look at it.
Oh, yeah.
Worked on it a little bit. And a high school teacher and his wife spent an estimated, I think it was 29 hours total work that they put into it, and they were able to solve the cipher.
Oh,
it was quite a remarkable achievement on their part.
Well, I'll say, is that the one that says I like killing people because it's so much fun?
That's right. That's
okay,
exactly
I'm
how
showing
it starts,
that.
and that's how the Hardens were able to come up with the solution. They figured a narcissist like the Zodiac would want to talk about himself and would start with the letter I. They guessed that the first letter of the entire solution would be I, and they also looked for the word kill, K-I-L-L, because they figured kill was probably going to be in there because he was killing people, and one of the things that they tried was, I like killing people. So they plugged that in, and from that they were given a lot of the letters, a lot of the symbols, and through a lot of trial and error, they were finally able to pull out the message, the entire message of the cipher.
Okay, yeah. The thing is, is this a cipher code that they came up with, or is this known to everybody? This code, the way you decipher this something, these symbols.
Once they showed the solution to the FBI and to NSA and the others, the FBI looked it over and said, "Yep, you've done your work. That is correct."
Really? Now, did the other letters that he sent with the symbols, were they the same symbols as that he used on this 408 letter?
I wish it had been so easy.
No way.
In the next one, he added an additional, almost 20% additional symbols. So there were far more symbols. It was a shorter message. It was only 340 symbols instead of 408 symbols. And then there were a greater variety of symbols. So the first thing they did with the second cipher that arrived in the fall of 68, the first thing that they tried, or 69, the first thing they tried to do was look at all the symbols from the previous cipher and see if they could plug them in and if that would mean something. Well, they plugged them in and it didn't mean anything. So obviously the Zodiac had changed symbols, changed the key to the code so that the 340 remained unsolved to this day.
Okay, so this is a code that he has made up then, the Zodiac.
Zodiac made up the code and sent the symbols to communicate something. And the Hardens were able to figure out the first one, to figure out what the message was inside the code. A lot of people have, in the meantime, have said, "Oh, I've solved the 340, or I've solved one of the other ciphers." Well, nobody has solved it for the criminal's original intent. And cryptologists look at different people's solutions and say, "Yeah, that's not exactly a legitimate solution." If you rearrange the symbols and then say some symbols mean this and some symbols mean that, you can kind of come up with pretty much any message you want to out of a series of symbols. Almost like an ink blot test. You can look at it and say, it looks like this, it looks like that. But to find out the code creator's original message that's in the symbols, if there is a message, to find that original message, you have to be consistent and say, well, the letter L means this throughout the message, or the X symbol means this throughout the message, and this is the sentences that come out of it. And so only one has been legitimately solved.
And how many of them are there?
There are a total of 4. The last 2 were less significant because they were really short. There was a 32 symbol cipher, and there's a 13 symbol cipher. If you get down to 13 and 32, there's not enough symbols there to actually make a legitimate code that can be broken. In other words, the 13 symbol code could pretty much mean anything anybody wants it to mean, just because it's so short. And especially if you consider that the Zodiac was known to do a lot of spelling mistakes. It's one of the amazing things with the 408 that the Hardens were able to solve was because there were a lot of spelling mistakes in the code. There are also a lot of coding errors, so that a supercomputer would have a difficult time time deciphering it, because a computer can't be, you have to tell a computer, don't look for just correct words, but look for spelling mistakes.
So he did that on purpose.
Yeah, some people think he did that to make the code more difficult to solve. And for instance, he used the word forest, but spelled it with 2 R's.
Uh-huh.
So if you try to get a computer to decode that, a computer will look at forest with 1 R, nope, doesn't fit, and then it'll move on.
Do you think that the Zodiac was intelligent?
I do, yes, and so did the original researchers. The original detectives, they were quite certain that he was intelligent, and he was masking the level of his intelligence. Mm-hmm. There are other researchers today who say they don't think he was intelligent, but he was trying to look intelligent by using big words. One researcher I know thinks that he was dyslexic, and that's why he wasn't trying to misspell words, but that's just how dyslexics write.
The handwriting, though. The handwriting is not. I mean, it's not a. I've seen educated people's handwriting, and I don't know. His handwriting doesn't look like. I hope nobody says anything about like an intelligent person. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. People look at his handwriting and it looks like chicken scratch. It's really messy. Letters slant all over the place. There are big gaps between words. There are gaps between letters within words. There's a really extreme slant to his writing. So people think that, well, maybe he was faking his writing. But the chief document examiner back in '69 looked at the Zodiac's writing and said, no, that's his actual handwriting.
Yeah, because I've seen some other notes by him, and it is the same handwriting.
So the document examiner thinks that if you ever saw him in a bank and filling out a deposit slip, you might recognize that handwriting. I am not so sure about that, because I think he was intelligent enough to be able to fake his handwriting. In other words, if you know what your handwriting is, you can create a font that's slightly different and begin to write differently than your own handwriting. And it's my guess that that's what he did. Otherwise, I think after all of these years, somebody would have recognized that handwriting, because it is very distinctive in how horrible it is. And this is from me, who can't, who has really messy handwriting as well. But he actually printed all of his words. He never used cursive, which is interesting and possibly telling, because printing letters is one thing that you can do to avoid detection. It's a well-known strategy for faking your handwriting.
So if somebody uses cursive, it's easier to identify?
It is, yes, because not only are you looking at letter similarities, but you're looking at ways in which letters are joined. And another way to prevent detection is not go over the same line twice. So the Zodiac appears to have done that. A lot of his K's that he drew, he actually drew with 3 strokes. Because if you write a K with 2 strokes, it can be easier to identify. And so it looks like the Zodiac wrote in such a way that he didn't overtrace any of his previous lines.
He also uses a lot of space in between his words.
He uses a lot of spaces. He uses a lot of plus signs for the word and. He tortures grammar. He messes with punctuation. He, in one place, switched a period and a comma.
I think he did that all on purpose, yeah.
That's what it appears to be. It appears that he was knowledgeable in grammar and knowledgeable in writing, but he was messing with people's minds.
I think so.
The best proof that I'm aware of, in the more material letter, he used 3 semicolons, and he used them correctly. Semicolon is something Right. So when you see a letter that's got 3 semicolons in it, you get the idea that this is somebody who has some education. John Douglas described the writing as coming from somebody who was an educated illiterate. I think that's a great way of describing it. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this person has some education, but the way he writes is as though he were illiterate. Well, how can you be educated and how can you be illiterate at the same time?
Interesting. Do you want to go on to the next case then?
Absolutely.
September 27th. Go ahead.
September 27, 69. A young couple went to Lake Berryessa to put out a blanket and sit and talk. While they were there, they were approached by the Zodiac. They didn't know it was the Zodiac at the time. They didn't know anything about the previous attacks. And this was just a few months after the attack on the 4th of July, of course. The Zodiac this time was in a costume. He had a black square hood on. He had a cloth pulled down his front, kind of covering his shoulders and about half of his chest. And on the front of this pull-down part was the Zodiac symbol, a circle with a crosshair that looked like a gun sight. Some people have said that that symbol actually means Zodiac. It means the center of the universe. Or it means the collection of all the Zodiac signs. And he approached them wearing this weird costume, holding a gun pointed at the two, and said, calm down, all I want is your money. And he was able to calm them down and say, look, this is just a robbery. He claimed to be an escaped convict from from Montana, and he said his car was hot, he needed a car, he needed some money. Well, Brian Hartnell, the male victim, only had 75 cents with him that day, and he kind of laughed. And he even thought to himself, what a great opportunity I have. This is only going to cost me 75 cents, and I'm going to experience a holdup. So they threw the 75 cents out for him to get, and they threw the car keys down once Brian found them. And then the Zodiac said, I need to tie you up. So he pulled some pre-cut lengths of clothesline from his belt and threw it to Cecilia. Cecilia Shepard was the female victim. He said, tie him up. And then once she had tied him up, even though she tied him up very loosely, she was so nervous, he went up and tied them both up. And then he had them get down on the ground and he hog-tied them. So he tied their legs up and tied their hands and legs behind them. And they expected him to go away because he had the car keys, he had all the money that they had. Unfortunately for them, at this point when they were lying face down, the Zodiac pulled a 12-inch blade from his belt and began to stab the couple in the back. First he stabbed Brian 6 times in the back, and then he turned his attention to Cecilia, stabbed her 5 times in the back and 5 times in the front. She was fighting against it. Obviously, she was screaming because she knew what was going to happen to her. The Zodiac coolly got up, walked away, and left them there. Miraculously, Brian Hartnell survived. The 6 stab wounds to his back were not enough to kill him, though he lost a lot of blood and nearly died. He faked being dead, and that's one of the reasons possibly that the Zodiac didn't stab him more time. Cecilia died 2 days later from extreme blood loss and from the stab wounds.
So I guess they weren't able to talk with her or get any identification from about the killer.
Convoluted story regarding that. A police officer many years later said, "Oh yes, I did talk to her at the scene, and this is what she told me." The police officer said that that Cecilia had seen him without his hood on and was able to describe him. And this never made it in any police file, amazingly. But Brian Hartnell, who only saw him in his costume, survived and was able to describe his voice, describe his height, describe the conversation that they had, described his demeanor, and pretty much did a fantastic job of describing what he had seen. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to see the Zodiac without his hood. He did describe some greasy brown hair that he noticed through an eye slit of the hood, but he wasn't able to give a description of the face.
Now, was it published? I'm sure it was published in the newspapers at that time that there, with Michael Mageau and now Brian Hartnell, that there was a description, one without the costume and now one with the costume. Were there any letters sent to the police about that because those two survived?
Well, following the attacks, the public attempted to help the police all they could, and the public really overwhelmed the police departments with tips. Many of them, most of them, useless, not helpful at all, and used up an awful lot of police time. But it wasn't because of survivors; it was just because of the attacks.
Well,
people wanted to help out to solve them.
Did the Zodiac?
Mike Mageau was not able to give a composite picture. He said he only saw the Zodiac from profile, and so a composite photo, a composite picture, was never created from what he saw, and it was dark.
Did he ever get hypnotized?
Mike Mageau, I don't know.
Why didn't the police department suggest that he get hypnotized?
Possibly because he was able to say he never saw anything useful enough to provide information, because it was dark out and there's no lighting in Blue Rock Springs Park.
Mm-hmm.
So all he knows is that an attacker came up beside him and started shooting. At the same time, the Zodiac had a flashlight in his hand, and he shined it in the eyes of Mike and Darlene, so they weren't able to see.
These couples, they were accosted by the Zodiac at night. Then they weren't during the day.
At night after dark, it was after 11.
Okay.
With the first one on December 20, it was right around midnight for Darlene and Mike Mageau, but for Brian and Cecilia, it was actually before dark. The estimates are anywhere from 5:30 to 6:30 when the Zodiac approached them, and it was still light out at that time. And the thought is that maybe he wore that disguise or that costume because it was still light out.
I wonder why he couldn't control himself and wait until dark.
That's another good question. He may have thought that the couple that he found wouldn't be there after dark, and so he had approached them before they left. Who knows? It's possible that after dark he couldn't find a couple at Lake Berryessa.
Okay. Do you want to go to the next one then?
Sure. The last canonical one was exactly 2 weeks, 14 days after the Lake Berryessa attack. The Zodiac caught a cab in the downtown San Francisco area, near the streets of Mason and Geary, they estimate. Took the cab out to the Presidio Heights district, which is a very posh neighborhood of San Francisco.
Yes, it is.
And then as the cab driver pulled over to the side of the road and parked the car, Zodiac pulled out a gun and shot him in the head and killed him instantly. Zodiac took the wallet and keys of Paul Stein, the cab driver, ripped a piece of the tail of his shirt off, and wiped it in some blood that he had from the bullet wound, and then got out and took off into the Presidio, into the grounds of the Presidio, which at acres of forested land. At the time, it was seen as just a robbery, possibly a robbery that went wrong and somebody got killed, because cab drivers did get robbed regularly in San Francisco, and occasionally a cab robbery would get violent and end up being a murder, so there was nothing to really tie that to the Zodiac until 2 days later, a letter arrived in the mail with the Zodiac's handwriting saying, "I am the one who killed the cab driver." And in that letter was a piece of Paul Stine's shirt tail covered in blood, so that there was no misunderstanding at this point that that was a Zodiac murder.
Wasn't the police alerted about a man walking from the cab, but they were given the wrong description?
Oh yeah, the Zodiac was nearly caught as he was leaving the crime scene, because three teenagers were watching what was going on. They were looking out the window right across the road and saw something going on. They didn't know what was going on. They didn't hear the gunshot. They just saw that the passenger was wrestling with the cab driver, and so they called the police, and the police rushed to the scene. Somehow the message was conveyed that the attacker was an NMA, Negro male adult, or a black African American adult. And two police officers driving to the scene drove by, probably, most likely, the Zodiac as he was walking around the corner from where the crime scene was. They took one look at him and said, "Oh, that's a white guy," so they drove past. That's what they claimed. And so the Zodiac was never caught at that time. Had the broadcast been different, who knows what would have happened. There could have been a shootout between those police officers and the Zodiac, or who knows. But a month later, the Zodiac wrote and claimed that two police officers actually stopped him and asked him if he'd seen anything, and that he directed them around the corner and then took off himself. So there's a dispute as to whether the Zodiac actually stopped. The police officers stopped the Zodiac, or this was just the Zodiac's fabricated tale.
Now, at the end of his letter, did he state something about a school bus and children?
Yes, the letter that came 2 days later following the murder of Paul Stine, the Zodiac said that he is going to do a sniper attack on a bus. He's going to shoot out the tires of a bus and then, in his words, pick off the kiddies as they came bouncing out. Well, this sent the city into an uproar, because everybody was scared that this is exactly what he was going to do. And of course, in the Bay Area, there are tens of thousands of students driving around twice a day in thousands of buses covering literally tens of thousands of miles. So what to do? Well, each district took care of the situation in their own way. Some of them sent police officers riding along with buses, or sent buses out with police cars trailing them. In Napa, they sent planes in the air to watch over the area. They gave bus drivers instructions of what to do, to honk their horn and keep driving, and tell all the kids to duck down if anybody tries to shoot at the bus. But it really caused quite a scene in the area. But then the Zodiac never followed up on that, and even criticized anybody who thought he was serious about doing what he said he was going to do.
You know, what about the connection to Mount Diablo, which is 20 minutes from my house?
Okay. You're not involved in this in any way.
No.
Are you?
No, but I'm really fascinated about this, because can you tell the viewers about it?
Sure. The Zodiac sent a letter the following year after the murder of Paul Stine, and as far as we know, Paul Stine was the last murder victim of the Zodiac. He never claimed credit for murders after that. He said that he was going to change the way he operated, so that his future victims would look like accidents and murders of anything but an actual murder. He said he wasn't going to claim any victims, which may have just been a face-saving means of stopping killing, but leaving the police to always wonder whether he was continuing to kill. But anyways, in the following year, he sent the map letter, which was a one-page letter that had a piece of a map inside the envelope. The piece of the map showed the San Francisco Bay Area, and it was large enough so that Mount Diablo was included in that piece of map. Over Mount Diablo, the Zodiac drew a crossed circle, the Zodiac symbol, and then wrote some words on that as well. In addition to the crosshairs circle, he wrote, "Is to be set to Mag N," which people interpreted that's got to be set to magnetic north, whatever that meant. In the letter that accompanied the map, the Zodiac claimed to have set a bomb that was set to explode to kill school children. And he said, if you if you crack this code and use that on the map, that will tell you where the bomb has been set. He said, the map coupled with this code will tell you where the bomb is set. Well, people wondered what was going on in the Zodiac's mind after that, because criminals have been known to send maps to police departments, but usually when they send a map, it's to a murder victim, it's a map to a dump site, it's a map to property, something useful. Never in the history of criminology has a criminal ever sent a map with a code saying, solve this code and use this code on the map centered at Mount Diablo and figure out where this bomb has been set. Well, by this time the police didn't think a bomb really existed. It was just an idle threat, so they didn't take it too seriously. But a researcher many years later noticed that, and this is how Mount Diablo figures into the case. In a follow-up letter, the Zodiac said, there's a rating angle involved in understanding how that map works. He said the Mount Diablo code concerns radians and number of inches along the radians. And that's where I got the title for my journal, by the way.
Awesome.
But the researcher noticed, what's a rating angle and what's the criminal talking about? The Mount Diablo code and radians and inches. What does that have to do with anything? And a radian is an angle of about 59 degrees. It's used in mathematics and it's used in engine design with RPMs. He noticed that if you put a 59-degree angle centered on Mount Diablo, you actually connect two of the crime scenes. The murder of Paul Stein, you draw a line from that to Mount Diablo, and you draw a line from Mount Diablo to, I believe it's I'm not even sure which of the other crime scenes. It might be the Lake Berryessa crime scene. If you look at the angle that's made by those two lines, it's approximately a 59-degree angle, so it's 1 radian. And maybe that's what the Zodiac was talking about, which is kind of interesting. It might mean that the Zodiac killed the cab driver because you can get in a cab and you can tell the cab driver where to go and you can pick your murder site. And the problem with that theory is that the way the Zodiac described it in the letters is that using that code and using a radian angle centered on Mount Diablo, you'll find where a bomb is set. So he's really not talking about the relationship between crime scenes. He's talking about the location of a bomb. So what exactly the Zodiac was talking about, or whether he'd just gone completely lulu, it wasn't really clear to the police officers at that time. But the code was never deciphered. It was only a 32-symbol code. Only 3 of the symbols were used twice, so it was essentially a random code. Any 32-letter solution is going to fit it. So it legitimate code, unless the Zodiac did something else with it and it wasn't a one-to-one cipher. What exactly the Zodiac meant by that code, no bomb was ever found. Nobody ever seriously looked for it. So many people theorized that the Zodiac was just starting to unravel.
Now, he taunted the police and he made threats through the letters sent to area newspapers from 1969 to 1974. And then further communication from him abruptly stopped. Why do you think that happened, Mark?
That's one of the greatest mysteries of this case, because as people know, serial killers tend to keep killing.
Yeah.
The reason they tend to do that is because when a serial killer is killing, that is the most important thing in their lives. They may have families, they may have jobs, careers, they may have hobbies, but their greatest interest, their greatest passion is in killing people. And so, Ted Bundy killed until he got caught. Dennis Rader stopped for many years, but was in the process of selecting victims and continuing on before he got caught as the BTK killer. Serial killers tend to not stop. So why did the Zodiac stop? And there are different theories. John Douglas believes that he stopped because he got so afraid at almost being caught after killing Paul Stein that he was afraid to ever kill again, that seeing police drive by him and almost getting caught, not because of his sheer brilliance, but because of luck and their radio message that was wrong, may have scared him enough to stop killing. Others suggested that he made a change in his life and maybe got married, started a career, and still lives in the Bay Area as somebody who kind of reformed. Mm-hmm. Other people think he's dead, possibly committed suicide, may have been picked up and charged with some other crimes. He was never connected to the Zodiac crimes, or maybe he moved out of the area and continued somewhere else.
Well, that's a possibility. I never thought about that. So do you think he'll ever be identified?
I have hopes that he will.
Really?
My interest in being involved in the case is that I have a sincere desire to solve the case. I would like to put an end to it. That's partly why I'm writing these books, is to dig as deep into this case as I possibly can and see what comes of it.
Are people continually sending you information that they get?
Occasionally, I talk to different people who have different suspects or claim to know something. I've had packages of mail sent to me from Europe. I've had people contact me and say, yeah, I know it's this person, or my publisher now got an email from somebody claiming to know something, and my publisher passed that information on to me. You never know what's going to happen when somebody passes away and the kids and grandkids open up a suitcase or a trunk in the attic. You never know what's going to be found.
Wouldn't that be, oh my God, that would...
But I think the Zodiac himself shared so much information. You don't write 20 letters and say it without saying something about yourself. So many of the things that the Zodiac did are unusual. When you do something unusual, that sets you apart from other people. Just the minor act of writing a code. How many people are capable of writing a code? Mm-hmm. How many people are interested in sending newspapers code? Well, that kind of narrows down the list of suspects. If somebody doesn't know how to write codes or wouldn't be able to do it intellectually, they can be eliminated. So I think the Zodiac did so many unusual things that his identity must be included in the file somehow.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to tonight's show covering your first book?
Let me think. I wrote the first book really for myself, because when I started to study the case, there was no good book that carefully told the story without bias and without sensationalizing. In the last 10 years, there have been a lot of books written by people who say it's my father, it's my birth father, it's my stepfather, and then proceed to pick the pieces of the story that make it look like their suspect is responsible. I wrote this book to just lay out the facts and say, this is what we know about the Zodiac. This is what the police found out in their investigation. So, in that way, I believe my book is set apart from any other book that's on the market. I will be getting more into the story in the second and third volumes, but for anybody who's interested in the case and just interested in knowing what the facts are, my book is written strictly from primary sources when they were available, and only use secondary sources when primary sources were not available. So what you get is a very clear and careful retelling of the case.
Why did you decide to write 3 books instead of putting it into one?
Oh my goodness, you're not the first person to ask me that. I was interested in writing a book on the case just because I'm so interested in it and have done so much research on it. Well, one book became 2 books because there's just so much information, and 2 books became 3 books. Maybe someday all 3 books will be published under a single volume, but it's going to be about as thick as War and Peace. Book 1 is already about 400 pages long, just because there's so much information. There are so many crime scenes, there are so many details of what the police did and what the police found and how the FBI followed up and got involved in the case. Once you read book 1, you realize, wow, this is a very complex case, so that even once the story is told, it's going to take 2 more books to actually analyze and go through that evidence and look at suspects.
Then so book 2 is, you don't have a title yet for book 2, but in book 2, what are you going to cover in that book 2?
We're going to, I'm looking at what we know about the Zodiac. I told the story in book 1. In book 2, I'm going to kind of break down the story. For one thing, when the Zodiac acted, there was no phrase in the English language, serial killer. The phrase had not been invented. In fact, back then, the best that they could do was call him a mass murderer, just because he killed more than one person. But in the subsequent years, the FBI has done a lot of research into serial killers, understanding how they're very different than a mass murderer, such as the school shootings that we see, or bombings that we see, people who try to kill a large group of people. The FBI has classified a lot of different types of killers. So when we identify the Zodiac as a serial killer, there's a lot of things that we can now know about him simply because we can compare him to other serial killers. And from this, I will be putting together a rather comprehensive profile of all that we know and all that we suspect about the Zodiac. So I think the book 2 will be entitled Profiled. But as I say, it's not confirmed at this point. So that's what I'll be covering in book 2. And then book 3, using that profile, trying to narrow down the list of suspects, because there are an awful lot of people who are being looked at this point as possible suspects in the case. Many people have different suspects. The police department looked at over 2,500 men, wondering whether they were the Zodiac or not, and eliminated many people. But based on a profile of what we know about the Zodiac, who can we eliminate and who can't we eliminate?
Really? And will you give the profile then at that time in the 3rd book?
I will be giving the profile in the 2nd book.
In the 2nd book. So will you come back for 2 more shows? We'll do this book 2.
I would love to.
I know. And book 3. We had planned this, gosh, I think 2 years ago or a year and a half ago we talked about this.
Yeah, we even talked about meeting at some crime scenes and taking some video there.
Yes.
We may have to do that too.
Yes, and absolutely, I still want to do that. I want to meet with you out on Lake Herman, and I want to take some video and and shoot a video on that. I've always wanted to do that, and we will. I plan on doing that. How about next spring?
That might be very helpful in moving the case forward.
Yeah, I would love to do that, Mark. Okay, so any questions? Royce, are there any questions from the chat room? Okay. Hold on. We got a 30-second delay. Let's see if there's any questions.
One question that always comes up is, were the murders committed by two people? One person committing murders and one person writing the letters. And that's an interesting question, but the handwriting and the murders seem to intersect at numerous times in the case, revealing that, yes, indeed, it was one person.
Were they ever two?
For instance...
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
At Lake Berryessa, the killer, the Zodiac struck with the butcher-sized knife, but then wrote on Brian Hartnell's car door before leaving the scene, so that the person who wrote the writing was there during the killing, so it was not two people, it was one person.
Did they ever get any of the items used, like the gun or the knives? Were they ever retrieve those?
No. The Zodiac always brought weapons to the scene and took them home with him, took them away from the scene with him as well. He did, of course, leave behind bullets and shell casings, but these have never been linked to any weapon. And the Zodiac never reused a weapon from one crime scene to the next. All of the recovered shell casings showed that he used different calibers, he used different weapons from one scene to the next.
Oh my God, why do you think he did that?
Well, the obvious answer to that would be that he was so careful about not being caught that once he committed a crime with a weapon, he disposed of the weapon so that it could never be tied to him. But that's only speculation. That would reveal somebody who certainly understands ballistics and knows about how a police department investigates a murder.
Now, I contacted you after one of my shows because a psychic had picked up that it was a former police officer or a police officer at that time, and I think the last name was Sanchez. Did you ever check into that?
I did. I did a Google search of a police officer named Sanchez having to do with Northern California, and I was not able to find anybody to make a match. So, yeah, I tend to look at psychics as for their entertainment value. Police departments don't generally take them seriously in investigation, but I know some departments have been open to them. What psychics frequently do is make very vague statements, and so that when a crime is solved, they can say, oh yeah, see, the letter R was used somewhere. I said the letter R was going to be involved, and that the suspect had a letter R in their name. Well, that's not a very specific hit.
Yeah, let's see. My husband had entered the police department in 1972. So he was familiar also what was going on with the Zodiac. And I had asked him, if he knew of a policeman by the name of Sanchez and that might have been working on the case. And he said, no, he didn't know of any. Okay, so we have some questions from Paul M. Who, in your opinion, is the strongest suspect?
Oh, that's a good question. There are a lot of suspects, and there are a lot of not very good suspects. The prime suspect for the police was Arthur Lee Allen.
Yeah.
He was the prime suspect back at the time. There were a lot of circumstantial matches between him and the crime. he was eliminated through handwriting, through DNA. They were able to recover a partial DNA print from the letters. Personality-wise, he doesn't have the personality of the Zodiac serial killer. The Zodiac tended to be more intellectual and quiet. Whenever he was at a crime scene, whenever he was observed, people described his talking as being rehearsed or very deliberate, didn't know what to say next. There were long pauses, or he came across as though he were reading a script. Well, that's not at all like Arthur Lee Allen at all. Arthur Lee Allen was loud and was a braggart and couldn't shut up, and just personality-wise, Arthur Lee Allen was eliminated. So the police are kind of at a loss to have a suspect at this point.
Mark, what about the oh my God, the dispatcher? Didn't she recently die?
She did. Nancy Slover received a telephone call from the Zodiac at 12:40, July the 5th, 1969, about 40 minutes after the murders. She was able to describe his voice as monotone. She got really scared just listening to his voice, and he ended the call by saying goodbye in a very slow, taunting manner.
Now, the police departments, don't they keep those recordings on file?
They didn't have the recording equipment back then in the late 60s.
Oh my God.
Unfortunately. Wouldn't that have been nice to have that recording?
Yes. Oh my God. I can't believe it. That's too bad. Yeah. Now, I think that also, did he say anything? Did the Zodiac write a letter or say anything about his conversation with the dispatcher?
Yeah, he in a subsequent letter wrote that he was having some fun with the cop, the Vallejo cop. So he did make reference to it.
Okay. All right, another question. What? Did you want to say something?
And he called following the September 27 murder at Lake Berryessa as well. He called the Napa Police Department and talked to Officer Dave Slade, who also passed away recently.
And it's also the same thing. They had no recording of the conversation?
Correct.
Oh, boy. All right, we have a question from Starry Night. Do you think the suspect who worked at the hardware store, are you familiar with that, might have been the killer?
Yeah, that suspect is Arthur Lee Allen. That's who I was referencing earlier. Robert Graysmith wrote the book Zodiac, and the movie, 2007 movie Zodiac, is based on that book. He was convinced that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac, and he is, I believe, convinced to this day that he solved the case and that Arthur Lee Allen is the Zodiac. I tend to disagree. He has been eliminated from suspicion by a number of people. The book Zodiac is written with Arthur Lee Allen in mind. In other words, Robert Graysmith told the story with the assumption that Arthur Lee Allen is the Zodiac. So some of the facts that come out in the book Zodiac are not exactly are not true and don't line up with the original sources with police files. And Robert Graysmith also left out a lot of material that cast a doubt on Arthur Lee Allen.
Wasn't Robert Graysmith also a suspect?
Yeah, some people have suspected him because he wrote the book Zodiac, but I wouldn't put too much weight in it because lots and lots of people have been made suspects. You know, I want to write a book about Mother Teresa being the Zodiac, but
that would be
in the future.
All right, we have another question. Aaron Brody, do you think that the Zodiac had a troubled childhood?
Most serial killers did have a troubled childhood in one respect or another. Either they had a troubled childhood or they believed they had a troubled childhood just by the nature of the serial killer, what goes into the making of a serial killer. So it's quite likely that he did have some kind of dysfunctional childhood.
Well, you and I did a show several years ago on serial killers, the mind of a serial killer.
Right. And there are different theories about that. Some people think that it's genetic. Some people think that it's because of an individual's environment. The truth may be somewhere in between, but it seems, with current research now, it seems like the best theories say that there are a number of things that need to fall into place. Serial killers are extremely rare, and a certain number of things, like almost like tumblers in a safe, need to fall into place to make an individual a serial killer. And a troubled childhood, it's in some way tends to be one of those features. Whether it's an inability to bond with a parent, or the experience of physical or sexual or emotional abuse, something like that seems to affect individuals who later become serial killers.
All right, another question.
But that said, lots of people suffer abuse and don't become serial killers.
That's true. Yeah.
It's more to it than that.
All right, another question from Grandpa Obvious. Ask about Zodiac wristwatch trademark that was sold at that time. Do you
Yeah. Robert Graysmith makes mention of the fact that the only place that the Zodiac symbol and the word Zodiac occur together were on a wristwatch. The Zodiac Watch Company began making watches in I think it was the late 1800s. And on the face of the watch, you have a little Zodiac symbol and you have the word Zodiac. And Arthur Lee Allen owned one of these watches, given to him by his mother a year or so prior to the first Zodiac murder, or a year or so prior to the Zodiac claiming the name Zodiac. And that's one of the reasons that the police thought there was a link between Arthur Lee Allen and the Zodiac. The symbol and the word also occur together on a car made in England about that same time in the 1960s, called the Zodiac, and the hood ornament was a cross circle, but it was more square than circle. Mm. But other people say that just that symbol, the crosshair symbol, is called the Zodiac.
All right, we have another question. Hold on. Let's see. Okay, Starry Night. She wants to know, what is your gut feeling of the age of the Zodiac?
Oh, you got an intelligent group of people on the website tonight. My gut instinct is about the age. Mm-hmm. I would guess about 30. If the Zodiac started in 1966, he was probably in his mid-20s. So by 69, he would be in his late 20s. That would be my best guess, and that seems to be about the average of what people think. The police officer who saw him following the murder of Paul Stine thought he was somewhat older than that. Two composite pictures were made following the attack on Paul Stine. The first one was younger, and they thought maybe he was 25, or close to 25, whereas the revised one added a few forehead lines and estimated that he was 35 to 45, so he may have been older.
Mm-hmm. Miller wants to know, what do you think about Earl Van Best Jr. possibly being the Zodiac?
Another interesting suspect. A book has been written on that recently. The picture of him seems to be similar to the composite that was created after Paul Stine. So it's another suspect worthy of looking into.
And then I'm going to take one last question. From X Group Home Kid. Do you think any of the suspects had a military background?
Well, I know a number of the suspects have military backgrounds, and that's one thing that the police frequently look to because of a number of witnesses said that the Zodiac appeared to be wearing military type shoes or military type outfit. People in the military frequently got training in cryptology, so that maybe that's where the Zodiac picked up his interest in codes. The Zodiac may well have had a military background, and I know there are a number of suspects, and they looked at dozens and dozens of suspects back in the late 60s and 70s who were connected to the military just because of codes and because of the Zodiac's outfit. They were also very interested in the Navy because the codes also seemed to incorporate symbols that were familiar to the Navy, so that he may have had a Navy background, and that's where he got some of the symbols.
Well, didn't they get footprints that were possible military boots?
Yes, at Lake Berryessa, the boots were identified as wing walkers, size 10 and a half, and those were sold on military bases.
Interesting. All right, one last question, Joanne Dion. Were there any? Did they ever get any fingerprints?
They collected quite a few fingerprints, and some that they were very confident that they were the Zodiacs, but they couldn't say 100% that they were. Unfortunately, they eliminate a lot of suspects based on fingerprints. Well, if you're not absolutely certain that they are the Zodiac's fingerprint, then how can you eliminate somebody? They were collected from 2 different phone booths, and they were collected from Stein's cab, both inside and outside the cab. But again, public phone booths and a cab running around the city are going to pick up a lot of fingerprints. There was some fingerprints that seemed to have specks of blood in them, but they were never able to say for certain that they were later described as bloody fingerprints, but they weren't that, and they couldn't absolutely certainly say that those fingerprints were left after the death of Stein. It may have been that blood got splattered on a fingerprint that was already there.
Wow. Mark, what is the takeaway message from your book, The Hunted?
My takeaway message is that the Zodiac is a fascinating, fascinating subject. The greatest American criminal mystery. It's worth looking into. But I better warn you, it's a rabbit hole. You start going into that, and it sucks you in. It's so fascinating that there are so many different directions that the case goes into that you can spend your lifetime on the case and feel like you've just scratched the surface. I have friends who travel to Vallejo or read and research on the case, and they know more about the case than any police officer who's ever looked at the case, and know more about the history of Vallejo than most residents of Vallejo. I have a friend who's never been to the United States, never been to California, and he's absolutely fascinated with the case, and he's going to be coming out with a book on the case in the next year or so. So it's just a tremendous case, and it would be wonderful if we could solve it and bring some justice to the victims.
Absolutely. Now, when is book 2 being published?
Next September 2017 is the anticipated date.
Okay. So it's almost a year later. How come you're waiting for another year for the second book to come out?
Well, if you read the first book, you'll realize the complexity and the quality of writing and the detail into which I go. It's not something that I just sit down and write. It takes many hours of research, and my publisher does a fantastic job of editing it and making it look absolutely beautiful and checking the facts. And I'm sure there are still some facts wrong, but going over it and going over it again and again and again. We don't want to release a product to the public until we're absolutely confident that it's extremely high quality.
And I'm going to show your book again. Dr. Mark Hewitt. Where can they get your book? Where can it be purchased?
Anywhere, any bookstore can order it if they don't have it on stock, if they don't have it on their shelves. Amazon has it, Apple stores has it, Barnes & Noble, many other online retailers. We've been getting some very nice feedback on Amazon.com. If you want to know a little bit more about the book and see what other readers have said about the book, you can go to Amazon.com and read some of the reviews. There's also some good reviews on Goodreads.com. I have an author's page on both of those sites.
Mark, I want to thank you so much. And you know what? Next spring, hopefully, I can get out your way, and we will take some video before the book before your second book comes out, so I can show that. Okay?
That would be great. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, I'd love to touch bases with you again. Hey, Mark, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure. A fascinating topic, and it's one of my favorites as well. And thank you so much. And good luck with your book. I'm sure you're going to sell tons of books. Great to talk to you again, Noreen. Oh, honey, thank you so much. Good night, Mark. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good night.
Bye for now.
Good night. Fascinating. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did. Mark is absolutely fascinating, and I love the topic. We did air a show together a couple years ago. In fact, 2 years ago in July, when I came back to being on my own network, we aired a show on serial killers. And it was an excellent, excellent show with Dr. Mark Hewitt. So if you can find it on the, it's in my videos, but it was 2 years ago, so you'll have to go back a little bit. It's an excellent show. I hope you can watch that. Everybody, thank you so much for being here in the show tonight. Always a pleasure to see everybody in the chat room, and I will do some shout outs. Let's see. Don't forget. Next Thursday's show, my guest is Kayla Smith, and we're going to be going to Louisiana for the hauntings of Louisiana. It should be a really good show. She is a tour guide, by the way, in Louisiana, quite well known. She's got a lot of ghost stories. We're going to talk about voodoo and all kinds of things on the show next week, okay? And then on the 20th, Vanessa Hogel is coming back on the show for unsolved cases that happened during Halloween. So that'll be interesting. I hope you and she's going to try and solve them with her remote viewing. Now that's going to be a fun show. So I hope you join me for the next 2 Thursdays. I may pick up. The thing is, I wanted to pick up some Monday shows, but my father-in-law passed away, and I am in charge of getting things done on the house, and we've decided to remodel the house, and so I'm the one that's in charge of getting all the estimates and getting people coming over, getting prices, presenting them to the family, and so I'm really, really busy. I mean, my time is really, really short, and I had planned to do Monday night shows, and I don't think it's going to happen this month. If I can find a couple of my ghost stories that a viewer may want to tell their ghost story on a Monday, I can do that because it won't involve any research on my part. The most difficult are the Thursday shows. So stay tuned for that. And okay, everybody, thank you for being here. Let's do some shout outs. Okay, here we go. Chipateria, Lisa Knox, Nancy Soplavita, Bridget Harrison, Ted Olson, Aaron Brody, Phil M., Tommy Jean, Leo Paradisita, River, Starry Night, Real Psychic, Bridget Harrison, Andrew Cox, oh, thank you, Butterfly Kisses, yay. Anybody else want to shout out? Oh, and thanks to my mods. Oh my God, thank you, thank you, thank you, Crystal. Was Sweet Annie in as well, but and my Royce Hinman, Royce. Thank you so much, and Crystal and Annie, you guys. I couldn't do the show without you. Wonderful mods. They keep everything. We have a great chat room, and thanks everybody for being so nice in the chat room. Griffin Corcoran, Greta T. Griffin, you got to go to bed, honey. It's getting late for you. Greta T. Summer Sims, Joyce Lynn, Jeremy Lagus. Wait a minute, Lucid Wolf, Para Princess Patricia. Thanks, Royce. Semina Semicat, Carl White. You always come in at the last minute, and I know you're watching. Thanks, Carl. Real Psychic, Tammy Stafford, Donna Balt, Carrie White, April Fagan. Yes, April, shout out. Charmy Vapes, Donella Daywood Love, X Group Home Kid. Good night. Anybody else want to shout out? Yes, shout out. Lucid Wolf. Oh, thank you, Phil M. Thank you. Oh, yeah, Ted, we have a good chat room. Join us on Thursdays. SW Ghost Hunter. Oh, UK. Oh, my goodness. Thank you. Southwest Ghost Hunter. Thank you for being here. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, gosh. Hold on. Yeah, okay. Tommy Jean, River, Ted. Okay, Nancy Sopovita, Tammy Sifford, Miller. Anybody else? Lily Villalobos. Shout out to Lily. Yes. Zoe Small. Anybody else? Joyce Lynn. Anybody else? Want a shout out? So tomorrow my weekend starts, and back to work on my father-in-law's house. I said hi to River. Okay, guys, so I guess that's it for tonight. And again, thank you so much for being here every Thursday. I really appreciate it. And a safe. I feel so bad for the East Coast. Is it South Carolina or North Carolina and Florida? I guess we'll know tonight or tomorrow morning how bad they get hit. And hope everybody can get safe somewhere from that horrible storm that's coming. And everybody send prayers out to them, okay? Okay, Sifford. Tammy Sifford. Okay, honey. Sorry. And Jeremy Lagus, I think we're gonna do a part 2 to the mortician show. Jeremy wants to come back, and I think we're gonna do a part 2. All right. So everybody, thank you again so much. I love you guys. Have a great weekend. Group hug. Halloween season. October's one of my favorite months of the year. October through January, up to January 1st. The rest of the months I don't like. This is my favorite time of the year, from August to December. Love you guys. Group hug to everybody, and be safe out there. And I love you guys. So thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you in my chat room. Thanks, guys. So I'm going to say goodnight, okay? You guys have a great weekend. Love you guys. Good night. Oh, yes. Royce, honey, thank you. Jimmy contacted me. Yes, he's okay. He's been off social media, and he's been off social media to take care of some things, and I think he had some medical issues, and he has phone issues as well. And he said that he'll be back as soon as he can. So Jimmy Cortez is fine, everybody. And Royce, thank you for reminding me. So that was really good news. That really made my day when I got a message from him. So I just so you know, Jimmy is okay. All right. Thank you. And so everybody, good night. I love you guys. Good night.